Circleville, Ohio. In the mid-1970s, it was the kind of place you see in postcards. A small Midwestern town where life moved at a slower pace, where faith and family were the bedrock of the community, and where the biggest event of the year was the annual pumpkin show. It was a town built on trust, where neighbors knew each other by name, and the horrors of the outside world felt a million miles away. But in 1976, a shadow fell over Circleville. It didn't arrive with a siren or a gunshot, but with the quiet rustle of an envelope. A poison pen was about to turn this idyllic town into a landscape of fear, paranoia, and death. Our story begins with Mary Gillispie, a local school bus driver, a wife, and a mother living a seemingly ordinary life. In March of 1977, she walked to her mailbox and found a letter with no return address, postmarked from Columbus, a city 30 miles to the north. The handwriting was a crude, blocky script. The message inside was a chilling accusation, a direct and personal threat that shattered her world in an instant. It read, "Mrs. Gillispie, stay away from Massey. Don't lie when questioned about meeting him. I know where you live. I've been observing your house and know you have children. This no joke. Please take it serious." The letter accused Mary of having an affair with the married superintendent of the West Falls School District, Gordon Massey. Mary and her husband Ron were stunned. They initially dismissed it as a cruel but isolated prank, perhaps the work of someone with a personal grudge. They decided to keep it to themselves, hoping that silence would starve the writer of the attention they craved. They were wrong. This was not just a prankster. The writer's methods betrayed a calculated and cunning mind. While the intimate knowledge of Mary's life, her home, and her children pointed to a local resident, the choice to mail the letters from Columbus was a deliberate act of misdirection. It required a conscious effort, a 60-mile round trip, designed to throw investigators off the scent and suggest an external threat. From the very first letter, the Phantom of Circleville demonstrated a chilling level of foresight and criminal sophistication. The letters didn't stop. They multiplied, arriving with a terrifying frequency. The writer's campaign of terror quickly metastasized, spreading from the Gillispie household to the entire community. Soon, other residents and local businesses began receiving letters, each one filled with vicious accusations of embezzlement, domestic violence, and even murder. The writer seemed to know everyone's darkest secrets, real or imagined, and delighted in exposing them. A quiet town was now gripped by a collective paranoia. Anyone could be the next target. Anyone could be the author. For the Gillispie family, the harassment escalated from private fear to public humiliation. The writer's threats became more brazen. They warned they would broadcast the alleged affair on CB radios and plaster it on billboards. Soon after, crude, hand-painted signs began appearing along Mary's school bus route. The messages were obscene, and worse, they began to target the Gillispie's young daughter, Tracy. Ron Gillispie, tormented and enraged, would drive around town in the pre-dawn hours, desperately tearing down the signs before his daughter could see the vile words written about her. The writer's focus then turned to Ron himself, with letters designed not just to inform, but to incite. The messages were a masterclass in psychological manipulation, questioning his manhood and goading him toward violence. One letter explicitly advised him, "You should catch them together and kill them both." Another warned that if he failed to act, his own life would be in danger. This was not merely an attempt to expose an affair. It was a strategic exercise in social engineering. By turning neighbors against each other and pushing Ron toward a violent confrontation, the writer was acting as a puppeteer, attempting to orchestrate a public tragedy from the shadows. Overwhelmed, the Gillispies finally confided in Ron's sister Karen and her husband Paul Freshour. Mary suspected the letters might be from a fellow bus driver, David Longbury, who had once made an unwanted advance toward her. In a desperate attempt to fight back, the family sent a few letters of their own to Longbury, warning him to stop. For a short while, the poison pen fell silent, and a fragile peace returned. But it was only the calm before a far more violent storm. On the night of August 19, 1977, the writer's campaign of psychological warfare claimed its first life. Mary was out of town, visiting her sister-in-law in Florida. Ron was at home with their children when the phone rang. What was said in that call remains a mystery, but it sent Ron into a fury. He told his family he believed he recognized the caller's voice and that he was going out to confront the letter writer once and for all. He grabbed his gun, stormed out of the house, and sped off in his pickup truck. Minutes later, Ron Gillispie was dead. His truck was found wrapped around a tree just a short distance from his home. He was 35 years old. The Pickaway County Sheriff, Dwight Radcliffe, quickly ruled the death an accident. But the scene was riddled with contradictions that fueled suspicion for decades to come. An autopsy revealed Ron's blood alcohol content was 6, twice the legal limit. A shocking finding for a man his family insisted was not a heavy drinker and who hadn't appeared intoxicated when he left the house. Under his body, investigators found his pistol. It had been fired once. Yet a search of the crash site never turned up a bullet casing, leaving no explanation for who or what Ron might have been shooting at in his final moments. The writer's response to the tragedy was both immediate and strategically brilliant. As the town mourned, new letters began to appear. This time they accused Sheriff Radcliffe of orchestrating a cover-up and even insinuated that Mary Gillispie had been involved in her own husband's death. This was a masterstroke of manipulation. Before any serious investigation into foul play could begin, the writer had preemptively discredited the lead investigator and poisoned the well of public opinion. By turning a potential murder investigation into just another conspiracy theory whispered among neighbors, the writer ensured they would remain a ghost, their role in the night's events shrouded in doubt and suspicion. The harasser had, in all likelihood, become a killer and had already crafted the perfect narrative to get away with it. For nearly 6 years, the letters continued to plague Circleville. In the wake of her husband's death, Mary Gillispie eventually began a relationship with Gordon Massey, the very man the writer had accused her of seeing all along. This development seemed to enrage the writer, and the threats took on a new, more terrifying focus. Mary's now 13-year-old daughter. A Christmas card arrived in 1982, warning that signs would be posted about her. One letter promised, "It's your daughter's turn to pay for what you've done." On the afternoon of February 7, 1983, that threat nearly became a reality. While driving her empty school bus, Mary spotted another vulgar sign about her daughter lashed to a fence post. Weary and angry, she pulled over to tear it down. As she tugged at the wood, she noticed something was wrong. A piece of twine was tied to the sign, leading from the post to a small box half hidden in the grass. Her instincts screamed. She stopped, carefully retrieved the box, and took it straight to the police. Inside, investigators found a loaded .5.5 caliber pistol rigged into a crude booby trap. The mechanism was designed to make the gun fire when the sign was pulled from the fence. Only a malfunction had saved Mary's life. The writer had finally escalated from poison pen to attempted murder. Investigators carefully worked to recover the gun's serial number, which had been partially filed off. When they succeeded, the trace led them to a suspect so shocking it sent a new wave of disbelief through the community. The gun belonged to Paul Freshour, Mary's brother-in-law, the man who had sat with her and Ron years earlier trying to help them unmask their tormentor. The case against Paul seemed to snap into place. His estranged wife, Karen Sue, told investigators that she believed Paul was, in fact, the Circleville letter writer. A handwriting expert testified that while the analysis was not definitive, Paul could have written the letters. But the foundation of the case was shaky. The booby trap itself was a dramatic departure from the writer's established pattern of anonymity and psychological distance. For years, the writer had operated from the shadows. Setting a physical trap was a high-risk, hands-on act that contradicted their cautious nature, a point later echoed by an FBI profiler who studied the case. Furthermore, Paul claimed the gun had been stolen from his garage weeks earlier. His estranged wife's testimony was highly suspect, given their acrimonious divorce, a fact Paul himself pointed out, questioning why she had never mentioned her suspicions during their court proceedings if she truly believed them. Despite the holes in the case, Paul Freshour was arrested and charged with attempted murder. The town held its breath, hoping the phantom had finally been caught. In October of 1983, Despite having an alibi for part of the afternoon the trap was set, and a defense that pointed to a severe lack of physical evidence, Paul Freshour was found guilty of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 7 to 25 years in prison. As the courthouse doors closed behind him, a collective sigh of relief swept through Circleville. The nightmare, it seemed, was finally over. But it wasn't. The letters started again, postmarked from Columbus, written in the same crude block script. The phantom's voice returned from the ether. The letters were sent to residents, to local media, and even to the producers of the television show Unsolved Mysteries after they began investigating the case. Their postcard was a direct threat. "Forget Circleville, Ohio. If you come to Ohio, you El Sickos will pay." The writer was still out there, and they were watching. The development was baffling. How could Paul Freshour be sending letters from a state prison in Lima, Ohio, that were being postmarked 100 miles away in Columbus? The prison warden, besieged by complaints from Sheriff Radcliffe, was determined to find out. He placed Paul in solitary confinement, restricting his access to writing materials and outside contact. The letters continued without pause. The warden conducted 2, possibly 3, full-scale investigations and came to a stunning conclusion. He wrote a letter to Paul's wife stating that, as far as he was concerned, it was impossible for Paul to be writing and sending the letters from prison. It was an official exoneration from the one man who knew Paul's situation best, yet it had no legal power. Then came the most chilling letter of all. This one was addressed to Paul Freshour himself, delivered to his prison cell. It was a sadistic taunt from the true writer, a message to the man they had seemingly sacrificed. It read in part, "Now when are you going to believe you aren't getting out of there? I told you 2 years ago when we set them up. They stay set up." The use of the word "we" was a bombshell. It was not just a taunt. It was a confirmation of a shared past, an admission of a conspiracy. It reframed the entire mystery. The question was no longer simply, was Paul innocent? It was now, who was Paul working with, and who ultimately betrayed him? This single letter opened a web of new theories. Was there an accomplice on the outside, perhaps Paul's ex-wife Karen, continuing the campaign, or was the entire case a masterful frame-up? Karen Freshour had the motive of a bitter divorce, and potentially the means to steal her husband's gun. A witness had even reported seeing a man near the booby trap scene who did not match Paul's description, but did resemble a man Karen was dating at the time. This man's brother owned a yellow El Camino, the same type of car another witness saw at the location. Or was the writer someone else entirely? Perhaps David Longbury, the original suspect? Or was there never a single writer at all, but several people using the same moniker to settle their own scores? The conviction of Paul Freshour hadn't solved the mystery. It had only deepened it. In 1994, after serving 10 years in prison, Paul Freshour was released on parole. And then, as suddenly and mysteriously as they had begun nearly 2 decades earlier, the letters stopped. The silence was as unnerving as the threats had been. Was this a tacit admission of guilt, the writer finally unable to continue his campaign? Or was it a signal to a waiting accomplice that their work was done? Or, in a final, cruel twist of irony, did the real writer simply move on, their reign of terror ending with a coincidence that would forever cloud the case? We will likely never know. Paul Freshour maintained his innocence until the day he died in 2012. The case left behind a trail of shattered lives, a man goaded into a fatal confrontation, another man who lost a decade of his life in prison, a family torn apart by suspicion and betrayal, and an entire community that learned to fear the male and distrust their neighbors. The true terror of the Circleville letter writer was never just the words on the page. It was the anonymity. It was the chilling realization that the monster wasn't a stranger in a faraway city, but someone who walked among them. The writer could have been anyone. The person in the next pew at church, the cashier at the grocery store, the friendly neighbor across the street. They were a phantom who held a town captive with nothing more than a pen, paper, and the poison of secrets. To this day, the identity of the Circleville letter writer remains one of Ohio's most haunting and perplexing unsolved mysteries. The case of the Circleville letter writer is a web of secrets and lies. Was Paul Freshour a criminal mastermind, or was he the writer's final victim? Who was his accomplice? Or was the real killer someone else entirely? A phantom who watched this all unfold and simply faded back into the silence? Let us know your theory in the comments below. If you find yourself drawn to the darkness that hides in plain sight, subscribe to The Dark Silent and ring the notification bell. You never know what secrets the next story will unearth.